Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another segment of News You Can Use. And of course, my name is Mya Henry. And if you guys haven't checked out the previous segments, make sure you do that after you get through today's audio or video. So, today's session, of course, I'm going to be sharing with you guys information that anyone can use to their advantage, whether that's in their life or in their business. So, today is Wednesday, July 26th, and I came prepared to share some of the latest updates, insights, topics, and practical tips, and of course, news. That way, you guys can use them to stay ahead of the game. So, with that being said, let's get right into today's first topic. So, Florida rentals are cooling off, partly because at home workers are back in the office. So, after dominating the nationwide markets for rental price growth over the pandemic, cities in Florida are showing signs of a slowdown. So, eight of the nine cities in Florida saw yearly rent increases or at below the national average in June, according to researchers at Florida Atlantic University. So nationally, rents increased 4% year over year in June, while yearly rents in metros across Florida saw increases at or below that. So rents in Palm Bay rose 4%, in Deltona 3.9%, in Northport 3.7%, in Miami 3.4%, and in Tampa 3%, Lakeland at 2.5%, Jacksonville rose 2.4%, Orlando rose 2.3%, and Cape Coral was the only metro in Florida with yearly increases higher than the national average, which is at 7.7%. While the ability to work from home over the pandemic resulted in an influx of people moving into Florida, the return to office mandates that many companies have begun instituting are playing a role in the slowdown. So, this is what Ken Johnson says, who is at FAU's College of Business. So, when the pandemic first hit, you could go live in Florida and work from home 5 days a week. But as soon as the businesses in New York City said, well, you're going to have to come in some number of days a week, at that point, you can't live in Miami and work 1 day a week to commute back to New York City the other four. So, home prices, housing markets recession. But the rental price increase in Cape Coral, the only city in Florida to fare better than the national average, is a true, I can't say that word, attributable to scarcity in housing inventory in the aftermath of last year's Hurricane Ian, which damaged homes and propped up rental prices on available stock. But that doesn't mean that rents have become affordable in the Sunshine State. So they just aren't expanding as rapidly as before. The state is easing out of a rental crisis and into an affordability crisis where renters are faced with increasing costs and incomes that aren't rising to meet those costs. A few factors are keeping rents elevated in Florida with little signs of decline. A sustained influx of out of state people still moving into the state, hybrid office work options that allows people to work from home, and an insufficient number of units coming on the market to meet demand. So it's taking longer than it needs to build in Florida. And we're still exposed to the scenario where apartment rates could take off again if we don't start building fast enough. It's also possible that some people will leave the area as the costs of living are getting way too high. The yearly The highest yearly rental increase in the country were found in Madison, Wisconsin, where rents increased 10%, Charleston, South Carolina at 8%, Springfield, Massachusetts at 7.6%, and Wichita, Kansas at 7.3%, and lastly, Knoxville, Tennessee which was at 7%. In areas of the country where year-over-year rent increases are the highest, supply continues to significantly lag demand. It takes time to put turnkey units into the ground, and in time, rents will come into line as supply and demand come into balance. However, the issue of affordability will still be there. So these researchers agree that the rental crisis is morphing into a protracted housing affordability crisis, which more units on the markets and corresponding increasing in wages can best solve. So another topic that I would like to get into is how car buyers bear a heavy burden as Federal Reserve keeps raising rates. So auto loan rejections are up. So the Federal Reserve's decision Wednesday to raise its benchmark for the 11th time by a quarter point could once again send ripple effects across the economy. So mortgage rates, which have surged since the Fed began lifting rates in March of 2022, may now raise further. So could raise on credit cards and some business loans as well. Perhaps no one has felt the pain more than car buyers. It's not just that sticker prices are way too up or that lenders have tightened credit standards. On top of all of that, steadily higher auto loan rates have elbowed many would-be buyers out of the market. So something to consider. A study by the New York Federal Reserve has found that 14% of applicants for auto loans were rejected over the past year, the highest proportion since the New York Fed began tracking the figure in 2020 and 2013, up from 9% in February. So auto loan applicants, of course, aren't the only borrowers being turned down in large numbers these days. In that same June of 2022 into June of 2023, applicant rejections for credit cards, mortgages, mortgage refinancing, and higher credit card limits all rose too, according to the New York Fed. So overall, the rejection rate for credit applicants reached 21.8%, and this is the highest level since June of 2018. Some of those rejections reflect the subpar credit of loan applicants, but some are a direct consequence of the Fed's rate increases, the most aggressive in 4 decades. Those hikes in turn have made high cost purchases out of reach for some. So how will borrowers be affected by the Fed's latest moves? Credit card rates are at or near all-time peaks, and mortgage rates have more than doubled in 2 years. No one should expect them to stop rising anytime soon, said Matt, the chief credit analyst of LendingTree. Perhaps the scariest thing of all for people with credit card debt is that interest rates are actually rising more quickly than the Fed is forcing them to. So the average annual percentage rate, or APR, on a currently held credit card that charges interest is 22.16%, according to the latest data from the Fed. That's about 6 percentage points from the average rate in the first quarter of 2022. The average APR on a new credit card offer is 24.24%, the highest rate since LendingTree began tracking it back in 2019. So whenever possible, it's recommended that card users consider asking their issuers to lower their APR. LendingTree recently concluded that majority of cardholders who asked their card issuers for a lower rate received one. The average reduction was significant, 6 percentage points. So it is well worth your time to make that call. So what's the outlook for auto loans for anyone who needs to buy a car? So many people were already having trouble affording new vehicles before Wednesday's quarter point Fed hike. The average price paid for a new vehicle last month was nearly $48,000, and that's about 25% up the pre-pandemic average. Used vehicles prices have jumped by even more. So the average one now costs nearly $30,000, and that's a stinging 45% above what it was before the pandemic. In some cases, even people with good credit are being rejected for auto loans. The problem for them is that with the vehicle prices up sharply, the additional burden of higher loan rates from 4.5% on average in March of 2022 to 7.2% in June has made monthly payments unaffordable. So Jessica Caldwell, the executive director of Insights for Edmunds.com, says that she thinks people are just not able to qualify for the payments. The average monthly auto payment last month, she said, was $736. Over the life of an average loan, just under 6 years, a typical borrower is paying nearly $9,000 in interest. David, who owns David Dodge Chrysler Jeep Ram in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania, said that he has seen loan rejections rise even in his affluent Philadelphia suburb, though not as much as they have nationally. The larger loan sums that borrowers are now financing, along with the small uptick in delinquencies, have made lenders to be more cautious. And he says that he thinks that's probably making them tighten the reins just a little bit. He hopes that the feds stop raising rates after this week, given that vehicle prices, a key component of inflation, have begun to ease. Prices had skyrocketed in 2021, a result of high demand as the economy roared out of the pandemic recession, and clogged supply chains caused a severe shortage of vehicles that are for sale. These interest rates are really starting to hurt people. So Martin, the founder and CEO of Vehicles for Change, which is a nonprofit that helps low-income families obtain cars, said that requests for vehicles from people who don't qualify for loans have surged in the past year. He attributes the increase in part to the higher interest rates. The impact on families living in poverty is exponential, he said. If they can even afford a car at the retail prices used cars are selling at, interest rates are going to kill them. If they can afford the car and squeeze the payments out with the interest rates, the repairs are going to kill them. The combination of those things means that we're getting more and more requests from all over the country. And Caldwell of Edmunds.com says that she doesn't expect the Fed's latest hike in its benchmark rate to its highest level in 22 years to significantly affect current auto loans. With factories cranking out more auto loans and vehicle availability improving, she expects automakers to spend more time to subsidize loan rates to help fuel sales. So despite the rising cost burden, auto sales have remained relatively solid as prices have eased slightly and the supply of vehicles has grown. For the past 2 months, sales have hit an annual rate of 15 million. So what's in store for savers? So that's where the good news lies. Yields on savings account and certificates of deposits, or also known as CDs, have reached their highest levels in a decade. The average online savings account yield is 4.8%, up from 3.31% at the start of this year. So even juicier yields are available from CDs. The average online 1-year CD yield is now 4.89%, up from 4.37% on January 1st, and from a puny 1.90% just 1 year ago. The average online 5-year CD yield is 3.9%, down from 4.4% on January 1st, but up from 2.89% a year ago. All of that said, those richer yields might not last if price pressures across the economy ease further. If we continue to get good news on inflation in the coming months, expect long-term CD rates to drift downwards. So what about mortgages? So if the economy does cool, Jacob, senior economic for Lending Tree, predicts that mortgages and their rates will end the year closer to 6% than to 7%. The current national average for a 30-year fixed mortgage rate, according to Freddie Mac, is 6.78%. Rates have fluctuated sharply this year. The average 30-year fixed rate, which had pierced 7% back in October, fell to just above 6% in early February before surging back to 6.96% in mid-July. On the heels of better than expected inflation data for June, the average mortgage rate had eased a bit again. And this just goes to show just how much mortgage rates can vary from week to week and how hard it could truly be to determine what trend they're going to follow in the long term. It's likely that mortgages and their rates will continue to fluctuate in the face of the uncertainty that permeates today's economy. So, is the Fed managing to defeat inflation? The Fed has clearly achieved progress. Inflation, which peaked above 9% last year, was just 3% in June compared with a year earlier. That's thanks in part to easing prices for gasoline, airline fares, and used cars and groceries. Even so, current measures of inflation remain above the Fed's 2% target. The result is that many households are still being squeezed by higher prices and struggling to afford basic necessities. Reducing inflation back to the Fed's targets level will require more time. And that means that rates that are high on consumer and business loans are likely to remain in place well into 2024. So, along with that, I just want to add on how gasoline prices are spiking. And because their prices are going up, that's a problem for Powell and the Fed. So prices at the gas pump are suddenly going up, and this is causing headaches for consumers and central bankers alike. So the 2-day jump in gasoline prices, which is the biggest in a year, is combining with a rally in wheat and other agricultural commodities. A lasting spike in food and fuel prices would unravel progress on the inflation front, potentially forcing the Federal Reserve to continue raising interest rates. The national average price for a gallon of regular gasoline climbed to a 3-month high of $3.69 on Wednesday. And this is New York, you guys. So that's up by 5 cents from Tuesday, marking the biggest 1-day increase since June of 2022. And this comes just a day after a 4-cent increase, previously the biggest 1-day increase in a year. So that being said, gas prices have spiked 9 cents in 48 hours. Drivers haven't encountered anything like that since last June. And this is a very sudden jolt. So analysts became a combination of mounting supply cuts by OPEC and Russia, extreme heat that has sidelined oil refineries, and optimism about the health of the world economy. Of course, pump prices are still well below where they were last summer. So the national average was 64 cents higher a year ago and $1.33 higher at the peak of June in 2022. So commodity spike would unnerve Fed officials. Still, higher food and energy prices could stop the inflation cool down or even reverse it. Lower gas prices have been central to progress on slowing price increases, and that progress has raised hopes that Fed Chair Jerome Powell and his colleagues could soon halt their war on inflation. Higher commodity prices could mean higher rates, says Francisco. Commodities, a derivative strategy at Bank of America. In a note to clients on Wednesday, a spike in commodity prices could reignite a run-up in the interest rate and restart the battle between oil and money. The Fed is widely expected to hike interest rates on Wednesday for the 11th time since March 2022, lifting key rates to the highest level in 22 years. But investors are betting this will likely be the final rate hike. If we're going to have one and done, we're going to have to see inflation to cool. And that's contingent on commodity prices, says Joe, the chief economist at RSM. So war in Ukraine lifting grain prices. Just as oil prices have jumped to a 3-month high, prices for agricultural commodities are on the rise after Russia terminated a crucial deal that allowed the export of Ukrainian grain and large strikes on key port and agricultural facilities. Wheat futures have climbed to 5-month highs this week. The IMF warned on Tuesday, saying that grain prices could rise by 10% to 15% because of the collapse of the grain deal. Ukraine is one of the breadbaskets of the planet, says Robert, the vice president of energy futures. So he also noted that soybean futures have also climbed sharply amid concerns about high heat hurting crops in the United States. So hurricanes and heat waves, the inflation situation is to some extent at the mercy of Mother Nature. High heat has derailed operations at some major US refineries, according to analysts that are limiting their production of gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel at the time of a very high demand. And this is a concern because gasoline inventories are especially low for this time of year. ExxonMobil mentioned on Tuesday that one unit at its Baton Rouge refinery is undergoing maintenance. And a spokesperson from ExxonMobil said, "We're working to complete the maintenance as quickly as possible and continue to meet customer contractual commitments." He also said that even a 20-minute power outage at the refinery can delay supplies for just a couple of days. Refineries are exposed to the elements just like humans. They don't thrive in 115 degrees. Beyond high heat, hurricane season looms. So there is a warning that a major hurricane that strikes the US Gulf Coast could lift gas prices to $4 or even $4.25 a gallon. So in reality, it's just a question, what will Mother Nature throw at us? One of the last things that I want to get into with you guys is how young couples are having to decide between a wedding or buying a house because of skyrocketing costs. So for couples that are ready to take that next step together, there's nothing like planning a wedding, then going into sticker shock after discovering just how much it's going to cost. So the average cost of a wedding in 2022 was about $30,000, according to the wedding planning site called The Knot. And that figure isn't accounting for things like bachelor and bachelorette parties, engagement rings, and honeymoons, because you can't forget the honeymoon, right? So what's more, millennials are budgeting an average of $23,000, which means that they're taking $6,000 out in loans and going into debt to afford their weddings. So even after 7 years of dating, Angela and Chris Winder got married this year, and they were shocked when they first started diving into the planning. So a budget was one of the first things that we did. We went in with what we thought was a very good budget, but turns out it was a very not good budget, said Angela. And that budget was around $35,000. Now, $35,000 is a lot, you guys. And like they just said, $35,000 was not a good budget for them to plan their wedding. So the venue itself was almost $10,000. So there goes a third of the budget without even touching any planning stuff or just the venue. No food, no drinks, no nothing. So right there, you're kind of set up for failure. And with costs quickly adding up, some couples are having to choose between spending a huge chunk of change on a wedding or a house. And this is a dilemma that's at the heart of the aptly named Netflix series, Marriage or Mortgage. I don't know about you guys, but I actually did see this series. And it's basically a series where couples are having to decide between getting married, like having a wedding, or between putting that money that they have for their wedding towards their mortgage. So in the end, they basically just have to make a decision on which one they're going to choose. And the show is co-hosted by Nashville wedding planner Sarah Miller, who says that the largest budget that she's ever had was around $300,000 for just 150 people. In Nashville, Tennessee, The average wedding cost is around $65,000 to $70,000. Adding that, inflation and supply shortages have led to a sharp rise in costs. Meanwhile, many young couples are opting out of big weddings and either eloping or choosing to scale them way down, just like newlyweds Chris and Joe Vargo. So Joe says that it started bigger and then we were like, no, it didn't feel right. We had a venue picked out and then we nixed everything to make it really authentic to us. So instead, they just decided to have their own wedding in their home and invited their closest friends and their families. So Joe says that even then they spent around $5,000 to $6,000 in total, with most of it just on food and drinks. Both of them have children and say that their priority was to buy a house to fit their family. So Chris and Angela Winder ended up taking out a loan to pay for the mounting costs. The dilemma of whether a wedding is worth that much money is still up for debate. So Angela says, personally, she loved their date, even if it wasn't extremely expensive. It was beautiful and something that she will never forget. And Chris says it was beautiful and she wouldn't change it now. But she does think that they could have done something with that $50,000. They could have done something else with that $50,000. So people are realizing that weddings aren't cheap, houses aren't cheap either. So to some couples, it really just comes down to, okay, like, are we gonna spend our money or spend our budget on a wedding, or are we going to just opt to do something that is less money, or are we gonna use that same money that's in our budget towards buying a house? And at the same time, people are compromising because it just seems like they can't afford to have the wedding that they really truly want. And I just think that kind of sucks, not being able to do what it is that you actually wanted to do because there's a lack of money. And even then, a wedding could possibly just be a once in a lifetime experience. So why not just have the wedding that you and your partner dream of? And another thing that really speaks volumes to me is that, of course, like, these people are employed and they're working. So the money that they're putting towards their budget, they're getting it from their time that they're spending at work. And even then, that money isn't enough to supply towards lifetime opportunities and experiences. And to me, that just says a lot. And I genuinely believe that everyone has the opportunity to experience certain experiences in the way that they initially wanted it to be. Because I'm sure that it can make anyone feel some certain type of way, knowing that, you're going to have to choose between either a wedding or buying a house. So, yeah. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's segment. And in today's segment, I shared with you guys how rent is increasing in different cities across the country, how car buyers are facing raising interest rates, and how gasoline prices are spiking, and also how couples are facing whether to buy a home or to have a wedding. So, of course, share this video with anyone who you know may benefit from it, and I'll be sure to see you guys on the next segment of News You Can Use.